Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a great waterfront conference so far. I know I am. I've met so many great people, some folks in this room I've had great conversations with. And now we're going to have another conversation with folks on this panel. Just some housekeeping to make sure we're all on the same page here. We're each going to do quick bios. Just introduce yourself, where you're from. Keep it at that for now, because I want to do maximum amount of time for these presentations. I know some of them are very, very dense in a good way, but I want to make sure everyone has the time to get their point across. So I'll start. I'm Sam Sklar. I'm a senior transportation planner with Systematica. We're a mobility consulting and transportation engineering firm. You might be asking yourself, well, what is this guy doing on the panel? And you'll have to wait till the last presentation to find out.
I'm Andrea Silverman. I am an associate professor of environmental engineering at the NYU Tandon School of Engineering, and I'm also one of the co-leads of the FloodNet project.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dustin Atchison with Jacobs Solutions. I'm our global director for water resources based in Seattle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy Sperduto. I'm the assistant commissioner for engineering and planning at the Bureau of Water Sewer Operations for DEP. 25 years in water, the last 3 of which I'm very passionate about stormwater, and that's what I'll be talking about.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Vincent Lee, principal at Arup, and I lead our water team here in New York.
Great. So I'm going to just read the description of the panel today, and then I think we're going to start with who's up first. Andrea's up first. So environmental data becomes powerful only when it changes design decisions. This session examines how flood sensors, hydraulic models, digital twins, and water quality monitoring can refine design standards, structural details, and long-term maintenance plans. Basically, if you can measure it, you can map it, and you can do scenario planning. Panelists, that's us, will share how real-time environmental intelligence, currents, groundwater levels, salinity, acidity, ecological performance, and transportation planning can guide more adaptive and resilient shoreline, landscape, and infrastructure design. So I'll hand it off to Andrea. Andrea.
Okay. Yeah, and is that the slide clicker? Do you mind if I use it? Amazing. All right, hi everyone. Too many slides, so I'm going to probably talk very quickly, and I apologize in advance. As mentioned, I'm one of the co-leads of the FloodNet project. We are an interdisciplinary group of folks from NYU, from CUNY, and we work very closely with city agencies and community groups across New York City to do hyperlocal flood monitoring here in New York. The motivation for this project are a couple. The first is that we're seeing a higher frequency of flooding in New York and many other cities for a variety of reasons. And there's not a ton of data that was available or that is available in many places to help guide decision making when it comes to design, mitigation, response, recovery, et cetera. And so with that understanding, many years ago we came together and asked the question of how can we collect real-time quantitative data on urban street level flooding and then provide that data to various stakeholders in the forms that they need it to do the work that they need to do to help protect their residents. And I do want to really highlight real-time and quantitative are the important things that were not available with data that was available before. The goals of our project are threefold. So we are designing, building, and developing a low-cost sensor network across New York City. We are developing the networking and data pipelines to make sure that this data gets to our users in the best way possible. And our stakeholder groups are city agencies, researchers, and also community groups. And we do a ton of community engagement. And we do community engagement with city agencies, with community groups, with individuals, with CBOs, to meaningfully share this data with our stakeholders, also gain feedback to inform the project. And Veronique Ignace gave a talk earlier, and she's here somewhere, and she's our community engagement manager and does an incredible job sharing this information with folks across New York City. The sensors operate using ultrasound. We collect a data point every single minute and then wirelessly transmit that data to our data processing pipelines. We clean the data to make sure it's as clear as possible for our users. And then it comes to our platforms. This is an example of a sensor in Red Hook. We have permission from the DOT to put them up on street sign posts across the city. And we always include signage to let folks know what these are, where to find the data, where to find more information on the project. So about a minute or two after that data are collected, it comes to our online data dashboard. This is open to the public, and you can all visit it. This website. We currently we're actually at 400. We reached our 400 sensor milestone last week. We're very excited about that. We're going to be at 500 hopefully in a year from now. every dot here is one of our sensors, and if you were to click on it, you would get a thumbnail of the flooding that happened in the past 48 hours. And then you can explore the data to look at data across time. And you can look back in history, back to when the sensors were first installed. When an event happens, the sensors change color, the icons change color, and you get a sense of the depth, so the numbers of the depth of flooding in each of those locations. We heard many years ago from residents that not everyone is online and that folks still want the data for advocacy. So if they go to a community group meeting, they want to bring that data to their elected official, to their community organization. And so we partnered with New York Sea Grant and Sarah, who Eichner is here somewhere, to develop also these printable reports. And so every neighborhood where we have a certain amount of data, we need a critical mass of data, we make these reports. It has all the data over time, and we also add on 311 data and photos from the Community Flood Watch project to kind of highlight what flooding looks like in a neighborhood. I'm going to give you guys two examples of what our data look like. So one is from Gowanus. This is Carroll Street and 4th Avenue that is notorious for flooding. This is that September 2023 storm that many people here probably remember. Our sensor on this corner is in that red circle, and this is what the data look like. And so having the per minute data is really great to have high resolution data where we can see, okay, during this flood event, floodwaters approached really quickly. They rose very, very fast. We had 3 feet of flooding above the sidewalk in this location, which is a big issue for emergency management and recovery. And then it wasn't just one peak in flooding, it was 2, because there was a cloud burst and then a recession of the rain and then another cloud burst. And without this quantitative data at high resolution, you would not get a full sense of what this storm looked like. And I should note that on our data dashboard, you can add precipitation or tide data to get to see the context. The second example I want to give is from Jamaica Bay neighborhoods. Neighborhoods around Jamaica Bay flood almost every single month. So this is Beach 84th Street in Rockaway, which is also notorious for flooding. This is a residential street. The water comes up through the sewers, and like any crack in the ground, you see water pushing up when you have a high tide. There's high tide flooding going on right now. We just had a new moon, and the tides are really high. And so the past couple days, we've seen flooding on the ground every single day. This is what the data looks like just over one week, a couple years ago. Flooding every 24 hours, coinciding with the tidal cycle. And if we zoom out 3 months, you see that monthly cycle of tides with the moon cycle, and that we have flooding multiple days a month, each month. And if you were to zoom out even more, you would see a continuation of that pattern. Okay, just a couple, and we're talking about data use cases, data and uses. And so just a couple quick use cases. First, in transportation, I'm going to look at the north side of Jamaica Bay, one of our first neighborhoods that we worked in. We have really awesome collaborators in Hamilton Beach, and there's one road in and out of this neighborhood, and that road floods regularly. And so we worked with that community to put a flood sensor on that corner. So they know, when they look at our dashboard, is it water flooded? I don't want to drive my car through seawater, so maybe I'll wait until floodwaters recede. We're also working with New York City DOT right now to look at Brookville Boulevard, which is a little bit further to the west. This is an important roadway for communities in the region. It runs through a tidal marsh. It floods regularly, and when it floods, cars run off the road because they can't see where the road is. And so they got a big grant from FEMA to try to figure out mitigation strategies for flooding on that roadway. And our data, we installed sensors with DOT, and the data is being used to do a study to at least understand baseline what's going on that road. Okay. For emergency management, we work closely with NISM, NYPD, FDNY, because they use our data for situational awareness, for emergency response and recovery. National Weather Service, also really important collaborators, and when there's a huge event, they're on our dashboard, and it helps them understand issuing flood warnings. And then they also do impact catalogs after every big event, and they can use our data to have quantitative data to show the impact of a certain flood event. And then flood prediction and mitigation are really important use cases for us as well. We work very closely with New York City DEP, and they are our principal funder right now. We're really grateful for their partnership and funding. But also researchers and engineering consultants. Some of the use cases include thinking about our flood prediction maps, whether helping to calibrate and validate whether those predictions are correct or not. And then right now as well, as the DEP is designing and building cloudburst hubs, we're hoping to help them monitor whether those cloudburst hubs are doing the work that we're all hoping that they're going to do in flood mitigation. We're really excited about working with DEP for that as well. That's it for now. I just want to thank our big team, and I'm excited about the rest of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Dustin, you're up next. Do you want to stand or do you want to sit?
Am I next? I think Wendy's next.
Wendy's next. At the end of this, we'll have some time for a Q&A, and then there are some multiple choice questions I have to ask for PDH credits for folks in the room, so please bear with me for those. But Wendy, please.
Okay. Wow, that was really fast and rapid. Did she have 30 slides? I mean, that was amazing. I might slow it down just a little bit, but I'm really glad we organized our talks this way because Andrea talked about FloodNet above ground, and I'm going to really talk about what's happening below ground. So, we always start with this, we have all these drainage areas across New York City. Of course, before we were talking about sewers and drainage areas, we talked about the natural water cycle and hydrology on the surface. I mean, these just mimic our watersheds. So we have 14 watersheds, also called sewer sheds across the 5 boroughs, which basically take the water like a watershed, deliver it to the coastline, and it either goes to a wastewater treatment plant or it goes to a water body. Those 7,500 miles of sewers are the foundation for all that Andrea just talked about, because if they do not function, you end up with severe flooding. And of course, in 2020, when New York City became a humid subtropical climate because of climate change, right, our sewers weren't designed to handle that peak rainfall happening in such short bursts, right? So when they get overwhelmed, the water ends up on the streets. So how do you get better at stormwater management when your foundation is sewers? Well, first you need to understand what is going on below ground. And the only way to do that is to figure out how these are functioning using this tool. So in 2023, we completed our ICM hydraulic model, putting all 7,500 miles of sewers into the model. So all the attributes on the sewers went into this model. It went through a lot of rigorous testing and planning. And we are now using this in new and different ways to start really getting to the meat of how they're performing. And so on the left-hand side, this is what we saw before. Lots of pipes and streets, right? It's really hard to figure out what's going on there and how the system's functioning. But we are now using it and getting rid of the noise. And to the right is what we call Sewer Atlas, which is our trunks, all our trunk sewers across every watershed. So this was a tremendous effort. We do have consulting partners with Arcadis helping us put this together. This effort was born out of my engineering team, and Arcadis has helped us across all of the sewer sheds. As you can see here, you start to maybe start understanding some things that might be happening. You can see some large trunks all converging into one point here. That is not hydraulically optimal. So now we can map what we're seeing on the ground with what's going on below ground. So this journey started with the mapping and the Atlas tool. And we said, what do we need to do with this? How do we go, what's our journey gonna look like? So the first thing is looking at the criticality of the assets from that other map and from this map. You now see all our critical sewers. Those are our trunk mains. Those are the lifeblood of our drainage network. This is not something we could see before like this. So just seeing something in a new way starts to, open our minds to what's happening and what maybe we can do about it. So criticality assessment is the first thing. It helps us look at state of good repair, which sewers should we be inspecting, doing condition assessments. And we are relating this to the built environment. So we're able to overlay topography on this map. There's a reason why these sewers look like they do, the trunks, right? Open cut by topography, so you can imagine. We can overlay utilities and other built infrastructure and really start to understand what's going on. And this the performance assessment is the second phase. So going through and trying to understand which sewers are functioning really well and which sewers are not functioning as well. So that leads us to really, it's like when you go into a restaurant and you see the A on the front door as you walk in. Well, now we're going to be able to say, well, Owl's Head, might be a B, but this other area, maybe it's a D. So we want to grade the entire city so we can start really understanding where we need to make investments. Of course, like I've learned, everything in New York City, no one area is created equal. And so we have to assess the risk using this performance analysis across the city. And so we're looking at different factors, SBUs and flooding, primarily, right, in terms of the risk. But then looking at socioeconomic factors, the susceptibility to harm index, so how well do you recover after a flood event, population, and then we've prioritized for the first time in our history, we've prioritized flooding citywide. And so Andrea had showed you the 4th and Carroll flooding. There's also Knickerbocker. We have our top 10. I'm happy to say that in a few months, a project is being completed that will alleviate flooding at 4th and Carroll by 40%. So sewers, again, are doing a huge heavy lift for flood mitigation in New York City. And of course, we have $9 billion investments in the 10-year plan. And if you saw our 2024 paper, we have another $30 billion that we want to undertake in order to hit all these areas across the city. Technology continues to aid us. After we digitized all our 7,500 miles of sewers, we experienced Ophelia. After Ophelia, we were given a nice sum of money to deploy sensors. And so we have deployed over 250 sensors below ground. And we've strategically located these sensors in our trunks. We've considered the FloodNet sensors because we want to look at what's happening above ground at the same time as what we're seeing below ground. So if our below ground sensor is saying the sewers was empty, when FloodNet sensor was saying the street was flooded, well, that's telling us something, right? That's information that we can use. It could be that our catch basins are getting clogged and we need to do more proactive cleaning. So this information, this data paired together is very powerful for understanding and for solutions to solving for these problems. We also looked at the basin side, so the sewer sheds. We also looked at vicinity of our treatment plants, whether or not there was a rezoned area. And so all of this data is now in a platform. So we've centralized the data. We are looking to also pull in FloodNet data. We are also looking at rainfall gauges. And so the hope is, as you layer all of these things spatially in a dashboard, you start to see things that you can now, it's such a powerful tool, right? To understand the root cause of problems and come up with solutions. This dashboard, we can see the sensor's health. We have the time data stamp on it. We can go back and look at specific events at specific locations, quantitative analysis, predictive analyses, and of course, the ultimate will be when we can actually integrate it to a SCADA system. And this is in our smart sewering journey. So again, the marrying of the data across all of our sewer sheds. The thing that now with all this data, we have a baseline, right? So again, it helps us deploy our operations folks when we need to do operations. But when it comes to capital planning, you see on the bottom right, that's one of our sewer sensors. So what you start to see is you start to see tidal impacts in our sewers. The system's not going to function as well when the water is high, right? And so sea level rise, you can start to see this impact in our sewers. We can look at this and understand whether or not we need backflow, put in tide gates, other measures. And it also starts to establish a baseline, which over time, if you start to see this, the bottoming out of this curve go up, it could be that our sensors are picking up that it's sedimentation happening in our sewers and we need to get into them and clean them out. We can also now see where we have prolific problems with debris getting into the sewers, and maybe be proactive about preventing it. This is really cool too. We are now also, like I said, we're picking up the rain gauges. We have an agreement now with Mesonet, and Mesonet have their own rain gauges as well as DEP's rain gauges. and we can now spatially, we just have a better distribution of the spatial data for these gauges. And after every storm event, we map what happened, so where the rain fell and at what intensity, where the peak of the storm hit. This was from, I think this was Ophelia, and you could see, I said you couldn't have chose it better, the bullseye hitting 4th and Carroll for this event. But now we're able to not only after the fact analyze what happened during a storm event and marry it to the data from our sensors to see how our sewers performed, but we can also start to do predictive analytics, eventually getting more, layering in weather data in addition to this, and being able to, the hope is, in a smart sewer environment, strategically locate mechanical equipment to wield water around the system in new and innovative ways. So on this journey to a fully digitized digital twin, we are in this kind of first box where we're doing all of this assessment. I can say we have a really good handle now on the functionality of our system and where we have problems and bottlenecks. We want to move into this now, defining our condition assessment asset management program. Also, this tool is helping us understand where we can maybe break up our system in new ways, because these massive drainage areas are a problem. So making them smaller, giving them faster ways to outlet, will help them function. Finally, the full digital twin. We're trying to find where are the locations that we have opportunity so that we can say, well, this system right here is full, but this system really close by, we can move the water over here and use that capacity and wheel the water around. We don't have to follow topography anymore, right? We can tunnel, we can, microbore, we can drill, and we can now use that to our advantage to move water in ways that we haven't before. So that's our digital twin journey, and I can't wait for fiscal 30 to find out where we land. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Dustin is up. Take it away.
I get to follow Wendy and Andrea. This is going to be difficult, but hopefully we build on this. This is what's really exciting about this at this point, is that we've got so much data, so much technical advancement that we can now do a lot more with that data. And of course, I'm going to talk about machine learning and AI a little bit, but we're really in that paradigm shift where we're moving from deep, deliberate, sometimes delayed modeling that is really good and defensible, but it's slow. And so now with AI, we're able to increase the scale of what we're looking at, the speed at what we're looking at, and be more predictive even. Be proactive with our management of our system so that we can actually see what's happening before it actually happens. So we'll show a few examples of how we can do that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I was at NYU's commencement yesterday, and one of the things that came out is that the keynote speaker, of course, was AI as well, and he made a good point. He said, it's probably the wrong term. What we're doing is really AI is amplifying human intelligence. And so I also really like this slide, and again, I'm not going to go through everything on this one. ASFPM, the Association of State Floodplain Managers, had a forum last year about AI usage. Incredible forum about the risks, opportunities, but also they really framed it up based upon the personas of those who are doing flood management, because that data and the analytics differ depending on what you're doing and what your role is in the system. And again, the whole idea of AI is to enhance what operators, planners, policymakers, and communicators are doing in their day-to-day jobs. So really, one of the keys, what we're trying to do is piece all these efforts together so that we can be more real-time and predictive with our operations. So what we're taking is kind of the AI and machine learning are improving how we do forecasts. So building those models, using that data to improve our calibrations, finding those problem areas, and mapping where the flooding could happen based upon inputs, such as sea level rise, tidal shifts, rainfall coming in there. Now, we're also able to take that with probabilistic rainfall data, LiDAR, all that area, to show the distribution and probability of where rainfall might hit, and then carry that into a system that then can actually provide flood warnings, not only when it's happening, but perhaps just before it, hours before. So you can deploy maintenance staff and emergency services to the right places before those storms hit. And of course, we're bringing all these under one umbrella. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but really the idea here is that AI can help us throughout the entire life cycle of doing flood management, all the way from forecasting to planning and capital management to operations and developing your capital strategy. So I was asked to come into a couple of case studies, and of course across the pond, so Charlie's area here. So we are working with Environment Agency in United Kingdom to help them update their flood forecasting system. This is a massive system with over 1,900 models that feed into this. So not only are we using digital tools, AI, things along those lines to improve the existing calibration based on latest data, but we've also found there's over 220 catchments that didn't have much data or even any models. So how do we extend flood forecasting when we don't have that information? How do we do that very quickly? Well, we did a pilot of 8 of those subcatchments using AI with a limited record of data from it, using a deep learning model, LSTM. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of that, to basically teach the AI how to predict the next storms. We found some really cool results. One, very low effort. Only took a couple days to set up the system. Only took about a matter of hours to train the model on the existing data. And now that forecast, instead of running a model that might take hours to run, can take seconds. The other thing that was very useful about it is we didn't have to have a whole lot of data in order to have a good match. In some areas, we didn't have much data at all, but we could pair it with a similar watershed and said, learn from this watershed, take this limited data set and apply it to that. And what we found was we found really good matches. And really where the key was is at the threshold levels of where you need to respond to an emergency. So we didn't care as much about the tail end of the storm. It does matter because that tells you how quickly you can recover from the storm. But what really matters is knowing when you need to have resources out there to maintain or respond to the flood. But that's just one part of the story, and I can't cover all the parts of it. But basically, you know, the full suite of solutions here, you could do rapid forecasting, resilience planning, like I said, and then I'm going to dig into operational controls, kind of building on what Wendy was talking about, kind of that next vision of using all that data in New York. So this is our Aqua DNA program. It's being woven into the Flood IQ program that we have. But this is for United Utilities, also in UK. They have over 22,000 assets that they need to manage for their combined sewer and stormwater programs. This includes sewers, combined sewer overflow systems, pump stations, and storage systems. So we basically deployed, similar to what Wendy talked about, is basically pulled all that data into a AI-supported dashboard that really carries all that information in one space. So here's just an example of that system. So you can see actually no alerts going on during this time at this screen capture, but kind of a red, yellow, green analysis that tells you what's going on in the system. Is it approaching an overflow? Is it approaching a flooding state? It also helps you filter for the operations. They can see everything that's all at once. It's also prioritized, because one of the biggest things with operations when you have this much data is they get overwhelmed with what is called kind of sensor alarm fatigue. Just like they're all going off at the same time, so which one's the important one? That's what the AI can help us with, is understanding what are those critical failures, which ones do we need to respond to first. And an example is then we also provide very site-specific data that comes in this dashboard. So you can see everything that's going on at this sensor. See what's going on for rainfall. And this is an example actually from Wilmington. What they saw was actually they had actually inspected the system the day before, but then they got an alarm. And then luckily they had their crew right there. They were able to clear that blockage and prevent what would have been an overflow for perhaps days. And they would have been seeing that it overflowed in the past. They were able to clear that blockage and limit it to just 1 hour of overflow. Other key data that came out of this system for the United Utilities is, you know, it's not going to solve the problem, but it helps you optimize your system. So it also helps you come up with routines to change your control strategy. They were able to reduce pollution by about 20%, flooding by about 15 to 20%, all for a fraction of what that capital delivery cost would be, and something they could deploy very quickly. And again, just kind of final message here, it's not hard because the models are complex. The whole system is complex. So.
Vincent. Thank you, Dustin.
All right, great. Thank you, Dustin. Okay, so I'm going to go through and talk about how waterfronts are being shaped by data, technology, and AI, and I'll go through a couple of examples around the world, including one that's very similar to Flood IQ, so we planned that perfectly. So I think for me, I'm like kind of a history buff. I always like looking back and seeing like how engineers have forever been trying to figure out the extents and the movement of water through land and through cities and communities. So I don't know if anyone recognizes this map, but this is from 1944. This is a map by Harold Fisk, who tried to map out the different meanders of the Mississippi River, right? So each color represents different seasonal variations of the Mississippi River. He was a cartographer and a geologist that worked for the U.S. Army Corps, and they were really trying to rapidly figure out, as rapidly back then, the impact that that was being done on the Mississippi River due to all of the engineering works that were happening in and around the area. I would argue that AI can't produce a map that beautiful. Fast forward to 1958. I don't know if anyone recognizes this, but this is the Bay model in Sausalito. Anyone ever been to this? There's a visitor center. You're all engineers and planners in the space of like waterfront planning. You should all go to this if you're ever in the Bay Area. It's like you could totally geek out. It's a haven for all of us. So they built this in 1958 to understand, again, the flow of water like as a physical model in and around the Bay Area with all of the development that's happening and all the agricultural activities that were happening through canals, through waterways, and through the bay. And then, of course, 1968, FEMA came out with the NFIP, right, which ultimately has led to many of the different flood maps that we use today to help guide us in some of the decision-making around waterfront planning and around like resiliency in the communities that we work in. This slide is not out of place, right? So now we fast forward like to today's age, right? The acceleration of data, technology, and AI, especially AI in just the last 5 years, has accelerated exponentially, right? Like you heard from Dustin around the speed, the scale, and all of the work that we can do now in terms of real-time assessments can happen extremely rapidly, right? And it's really there to augment and amplify the things that we as humans can do. Modeling has been sophisticated, right? We've been able to analyze water movement, and what it's enabled us to do, though, is really to take an understanding of the computational fluid dynamics of waterways and impacts around nature-based solutions, right? We can understand now textures and crevices and all these things so that we can promote habitats in the aquatic environment, right? And a good example here is that, this is a cross-section of different variations of nature-based solutions that we can now analyze and really have that confidence around hey, we can go with a living breakwater or a living shoreline rather than trying to have bulkheads and other things. We can complement those two together. Now, when we take a look at land, machine learning and AI has really enabled us to rapidly understand and accurately understand the impact of land use. And everything that happens on land is what we see in water. And by using AI, teaching the AI, we can really start to scale up a lot of the work. And we did work back in, see Alan back there, we did work a couple years back in trying to understand as accurately as we can, right, the amount of impervious area in all of New York City, right, in all the 5 boroughs. So this just shows an example of actually where we are, of how that would happen, right? And AI, you can teach a portion of it to say, this color represents this type of land use. But the complicated bit with aerials is that you also need to teach it, what happens with cars, what happens in shadows. There's all these other bits that you need to work through that gets worked through with algorithms and all these other codes. Just another example of that imagery. And then you can scale that up, right? So Manhattan is 55 square kilometers, right? This is in Shanghai, where we're also able to conduct the same sort of level of analysis so that we can really understand what are the true options around blue, green, and gray. And that's 640 square kilometers, right? 12 times larger than what we were doing here in the city. Now, there's lots of different H&H models out there, right? And many of them are improving vastly. But there are also platforms that can help us integrate workflows amongst different platforms together. They can be scalable, right, in terms of the different areas that you can work in. And then, as you've heard today, they can really help us establish some of that real-time decision support, which we drastically need within our cities. Again, another example here in the city, mapping out the sponginess, right, of New York City. And then forecasting and being able to analyze all the different scenarios around the predicted rainfall impacts that we're seeing with NPCC. You could take that scale, and we could run scenarios galore, right? As Dustin noted, we can run hey, what if we had green roofs across the whole city, which is, I know far-fetched. What if we had permeable parking? What if we had bioswales across? But then you could do all sorts of scales in between that and 0, effectively. And then you could run it across each of the different neighborhoods, and you could understand, you could plug that into the H&H models, and then you could start to see what the impacts are. And then as Dustin noted, right, like the speed of this, right, like we can do all of New York City, you can do all of those different scenarios and all those different iterations to really help inform decisions in about 12 minutes of time, right? A sheer number of options that you can now start to assess in a very short period of time. Now about AI. So one example that we're working through now in Florida, in the Indian River Lagoon with the Nature Conservancy and Opti, who many of you are familiar with, is around real-time controls and active controls in the Indian River Lagoon, right? It spans 10,000 ponds, they tell me. So how can you actively manage water across 10,000 ponds in a massive watershed in Florida, right? So everything's happening, obviously, but naturally. But if we can use active controls and use AI to help teach each of those different products and systems, we could be much more efficient and we could protect many of the different communities that are in and around that lagoon and that watershed. And the real benefit there, there's a lot of text here, but the real benefit there, again, same thing, right? That whole process that we're working through can simulate all of this data within minutes time. Okay, to complement, look, we're all in this together, right? So Dustin talked about Flood IQ. We're working with Flood AI, a similar objective in terms of using sensors and machine learning in the United Kingdom to help enable proactive emergency response. So there's some a dashboard display that shows spatially the impacts of that, and then more specifically a lot of the data around it, so that we know where to deploy real-time sensors. We can leverage weather forecasting to help inform some of the flood forecasting, and then we can give advance warning of flooding up to 8 hours or more in those areas, and it's only getting better and more accurate, right? The more and more data it gets, as long as it's accurate and checked by engineers, the more robust and rigorous that modeling software becomes. And then a project that's like hits me personally is this project in Manila, Philippines. This is the Pasig River. My family grew up in Manila. So here we've created a digital twin of the Pasig River, really to understand the impact of plastic pollution. I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but there's an absurd percentage of how much plastic pollution enters our oceans that comes from this part of Metro Manila and the Pasig River. So the idea here was to understand the hydraulics and dynamics of the Pasig River and where that plastic pollution is flowing and where it's coming from, so that we can deploy interventions in the water, in the land, and along the water's edge, right? And you can see the example here of the sheer amount of pollution that's there, right? So by being able to have that twin of where's the water flowing, what are the different iterations of storms and tidal events, you can now start to really deploy and limit the amount of capital investment that has to happen, so that you're trusting the information, you're trusting the models that are being created. And that's it. And I'll hand over to Sam.
Thank you, everyone. I have a short presentation today because I know we want to get to questions, and I think I'll run through this pretty quickly. So, as I mentioned, I'm a transportation planner. I care a lot about the interaction of movement through space and how it interacts with water as well. If there's a water event that affects how people can get around. So, I wanted to bring an example in from Paris that my firm did. We're based out of Milan. We've got operations here in the U.S. We do a lot of our work in Western Europe. So, just a little bit of a background in terms of digital twin and the considerations. Sensors can collect data. Obviously, we know this can be infinitely calibrated, can be collected anywhere, anytime, and it can be turned off and on remotely. Not to counteract my AI partners here and friends who love it, but there is a cost to collect this data, both with money and in energy. Transportation, it's probably less useful than in real-time climate data to have an AI trained on models that can sort of predict what we sort of know on a week-by-week basis. Always want to just consider what you need versus what you can collect. These are the scenarios that we considered on the top. There were three that we wanted to build based on the digital twin of movement throughout space. And then I added two here for our water friends. What happens in a storm surge or in severe weather? And then ultimately, if there's a land use upgrade, how do you then concurrently upgrade a water infrastructure? So if there's a water main, how does that affect how people move? So for Paris, we didn't use sensor data for this. We didn't use AI. We used location-based data, so cell phone triangulation, GPS, floating card data from insurance companies, and then the API, you can connect to any of the shared scooters. So That's how we measured the different modes here. People walking, people biking, and people are using, we call soft mobility, and then driving. I'll get to the idea here. This is for anybody who's done traffic modeling in the past. This is a modified 4-step model. It's not an exact 4-step model, so don't come for my throat. The idea is that you're trying to measure where people are coming from, where they're going, how much it costs to get there, and both in time and money. Where people, again, you can build a matrix here for origins and destinations, split by modes, and then you've got your digital twin. And that's where I want to start this, is you can, once you've got your baseline model, you can introduce different scenarios that help to tell for the future where people are going, where people want to go, and what modes they might want to use. So this is a matrix of maps, and it's pretty telling about how people get around Paris. You see the Seine River. There's the water connection running through the city of Paris, and home-based others, so folks who start at home and go elsewhere, they're more likely to use public transportation than potentially driving or taking soft modes. So you've got your different distributions of trips out here, and what you can do with this is what it looks like laid on top of one another. This is all modes, and you can understand how people are moving through space using motorized vehicles, soft mobility, bikes and scooters and walking, and then public transport. What I think is the key takeaway for this model is the motorized vehicles. Most people are only taking trips in the periphery in Paris. I think that was done both politically, and there was policy, and also the design of space. Here are the scenarios that we tested in our model, but I added some on the right for this audience. And just something to think about here is, in a storm surge, how do people's transportation patterns change? If there's a flood in a neighborhood that's susceptible to flooding, how do people's patterns change? Can you drive? Can you walk? Is public transportation shut down? And these things all need to be taken into consideration. I cut it off here because I knew I was going to be long, and I want to make sure we get to your questions. But I think these 4 takeaways are key, and the thing that I want to bring up for this room is multidisciplinary planning and engineering is essential for the future of our cities, our rural places, our suburban places, anywhere. We can't do this work in silos. Our water friends, I would love to work with all of you on this panel here to think about how flooding, how CSOs, how sewer interactions work with how people get around the city. Second one is just from me. I don't think my boss wants me to say this necessarily, but just because you can collect the data doesn't mean that your model is better. It's important to understand what it is you're trying to measure, and then go get the data at the lowest cost possible, both money-wise for politically, but also energy-wise and water-wise, and making sure we're being conscious about how we're using machine learning and AI. Last two, if you can model it, you can measure it, and then remember to iterate. This is a living model, a digital twin. It's important to understand that conditions change, and they're continuously changing, and so once you've got your digital twin built, you can, if you can dream it up, you can model it and measure it. Okay, I think I've got to ask these 5 questions of everyone, and then we can get to your questions. So thanks to all my panelists for presenting, my fellow panelists. Super interesting. Okay. This is for PDH credit, so which type of environmental data is most directly used to refine flood-resistant design, elevations, and system performance criteria? Social media, real-time flood sensor and groundwater level data, historical zoning maps, or public survey responses? Just shout it out. Great. What is a primary function of hydraulic models and digital twins in engineering practice? To replace field data collection, eliminate uncertainty in design, to simulate system performance under varying environmental conditions, or reduce stakeholder engagement? Good. How do agencies incorporate climate intelligence into capital planning? By prioritizing lowest initial cost projects only, by relying solely on historical climate data, by integrating monitoring data and predictive analytics into investment decisions, or by avoiding adaptive design and strategies? See, excellent. 2 more. What is the key benefit of integrating real-time environmental data early in project design? It reduces the need for engineering analysis. It improves adaptability, performance, and long-term maintenance planning. It eliminates permitting requirements, and it limits coordination and stakeholders. B. Lastly, true or false? Combining sensor data with predictive models improves confidence in infrastructure design while still requiring engineers to communicate uncertainty in decision making. True or false? Everybody? Yeah, all right, okay. That's enough from me. I apologize for that, but it's required for PDH. Credit here. I'm going to skip the questions that I had because I know we only have a couple minutes here, and I want to open it up to the audience. Cassandra will bring the microphone around to you. If you've got a question, please raise your hand, and I will call on you.
Hi, everyone. Charlie from London. So I was really interested in those AI models, and have you actually cracked one for surface water flooding? Because all the ones I saw there were for fluvial.
I'm actually not sure. I think we're working in that space. We have a bit in smaller scales, but the next, this is the next iteration, right? Is that tying the in-system to 2D modeling at the surface, and so that is there. The capability is there. I just don't think I'm not as aware. I'm not a flood modeling lead, but I think we're getting there. That's the next horizon for sure, though. But you're right. Those are fluvial models, and so it's a little simpler.
I think the closest example of what I shared was probably the one from Indian River Lagoon, where it's all like a series of interconnected ponds and waterways. So it's not it's flat. It's Florida, right? Everything is flat through there, and many of them are connected like both ways, right? And that's sort of the premise of the active controls, is to try to manage that in much more efficiently. In terms of anything else out there, in terms of like trying to crack that, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah. That's the closest one of the ones I shared. Yeah.
I saw someone over
Questions?
For FloodNet, what's the strategy for? I know that you only have a certain number that you can put out just out of resources. How are you deciding where to put them?
That's a great question. We get asked that question every time, so I really appreciate that you brought it up, and it gives me the opportunity to talk about it. So, we have funds for 500 sensors to put them out. There's thousands of locations that flood around New York City. There's a couple ways this can be done. The way we are currently doing it, and I should say there's always a lot of debate amongst our team, the best way to do this. The way that we're doing it right now is that we reached out to our communities, both city agency folks, researchers, all city agency folks, researchers, and community members, and said, where do you suggest we put a sensor? What locations have you seen flood? What are priority locations? I want to ask about your top 10, Wendy, and see if we have them. I'm sure we do, but I just want to make sure. And so that's where we got, I think, 1,200-ish suggestions. A lot of those suggestions were in the same places, so we were able to whittle them down. And then we are prioritizing based on the flood vulnerability index, making sure that we're in some of the more vulnerable places from a social vulnerability aspect. Also, so that we have kind of like distribution across the city. We want to make sure we have that spatial distribution. We would like to think more about how to do this in a way where we're thinking about like the canary in the coal mine, like where is a location that'll flood that can tell you about other locations, but that takes a little bit longer to figure out, and we have to do a little bit more modeling work to do that. But that's how we're doing it for now. And we also are hoping in the future we're building out some of our front end and back end technologies to provide opportunity for communities to make. And I should mention these sensors are low cost. They cost about $300 each for manufacturing and parts, which is great when you compare it to like a USGS sensor that costs $60K. And so we're hoping there's also opportunity in the future for community groups if they want to buy additional sensors or elected officials to be able to support them in doing that as well.
I actually have a follow-up to that. Is this the type of thing you could use a digital twin to help model in the future?
To prioritize, yes. Yes. You could use a digital twin. Yeah, and like we said, yes. If we have good models that are able to predict stormwater flooding, and and be able to look at kind of the time series. So we want to know not just like the static with this event, whereas like the flood maps right now are quite static. We want to be able to say, what is the first location, what's going to flood, how will that impact then different locations in the nearby area, and how much time does that take, and how much rainfall does that take? Because it would be nice to be able to have our 500 sensors be able to tell us about the rest of the city that we're not covering right now. Thank you.
Anybody else with questions? We got one back there. I see two. One first, my friend in the white, and then my friend in the denim. I don't know. We're not actually friends, but soon. Come find me.
Thank you. Great presentations. Along the same lines with the FloodNet, what's the capacity of, say, a community or something that is not part of New York City that wants to get that data and then translate it to sort of like better real-time alerts to help a specific neighborhood get to safety in a timely manner?
Yeah, so outside of New York City. Okay. Well, so first, one thing I forgot to mention before also is that all of our data is on New York City Open Data, which has been really cool because it opens up the opportunity for like citizen scientists like Mark Bauer over there, and folks from city agencies, and people like researchers and people from other places are playing with the data, which is super cool. So open data is a really important thing for us. We would like to be eventually in other communities outside of New York, and so the same work we're doing to kind of build out our back end and front end to help New York City communities plug in on their own, we're trying to then be able to allow those outside of New York. But we're looking for a little bit more funding to be able to do that. But I'm hoping in the next like 12 months we'll be able to. There are some others that are doing flood sensing in other places too. And so I don't want to sound like we're the only ones doing this work. There's like really awesome companies out there that are doing it as well. But we are hoping that we'll be able to support those. And I think a big thing to note is that we do think a lot about city agency integration. And so like being able to, or data integration with city agency folks who are doing some of that work that you're mentioning, because just maybe along the lines of some of the concluding notes that Sam had, I do want to note, like, just because you have data doesn't mean it's useful. Just because you have data doesn't mean it's going to help anyone. And so we do want to make sure the data is easily integratable into the system city agencies are already using, and the flood modelers are using, so that the data actually can be meaningful.
Great. We had a question up here from my friend in the denim. I think then one more, and then we're done. Okay, next, our friend in Lacoste.
For the AI modeling, I'm really curious about the validation process. Are you training the models with real-time data or real data? Are you using statistical modeling to check against?
I think the answer is it depends on what data you have available. I mean, whenever we have that data available, we are doing that validation efforts, and that's kind of what we saw from the examples we did from the EA. I mean, I think that's just a matter of what kind of data you have available to work with that. So, and I think it's, back to that other point, is those models can also then inform where you should go do more metering to actually validate that data. Vincent, I'm sure you've got more to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first step is like assessing what data sources you're going to use, and then like similar to what you said with A, B, C, D, and then the restaurant rating, we sort of score it also, like in terms of like how rigorous or how accurate we think that data set is. So that gives us insight right off the bat, like in terms of the data that we're using. So then if we're starting to plug that data into models or whatever analysis we're doing, we understand already like how much checking on the human side do we need to do. And then anything, whether it's an A or a D grade, we still have people check it, right? Like the work we did with the city, we still had I had folks from other offices run like a brief H&H model just to check, right? Like what would you come up with, right, as a human? And then we would compare that information with AI. So that would be part of like a QA, QC process that you would run through. Humans aren't going away, right, like you said. But it's important that all that data is checked, right? Because as you all know, the AI that is giving us this information is all based on information that it's given, right? So if it's given bad information, it's going to equally give us bad data and bad outputs.
What do they call that? Garbage in, garbage out?
There you go.
Last question behind you, Cassandra.
Thanks. Hi, I have a question for the flood sensors. I'm wondering if you're familiar with or if there's Hi. For the flood sensors, I'm wondering if you're familiar with or if there's opportunity to have the sensors collect additional climate data like heat or wind.
Right now, they don't. We collaborate a lot with New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice and the Office of Technology Innovation. There's been a lot of discussion of also heat sensing. Heat's the big one that comes up. Also, people sometimes are interested in water quality. In our sensors, we do have a port to hook something else in, but one of the challenges, this is on the technological side, is power consumption. And so one of the benefits of our sensors that I didn't mention in that very fast introduction to the sensors is that they have a solar panel and they have a battery inside, and we don't have to plug them into anything, and that's why we're able to be so easily kind of distributed across the city. Once you have to plug it in or you need a bigger solar panel, it becomes a little bit more challenging to be hyper-local. And so I don't know what our tech team's current thinking is actually about being able to plug in these other sensors, but it depends how much power it pulls. But there is definitely opportunity, and I know that the city, and I don't know if there's city folks here who work on this, are interested in doing more heat monitoring, humidity monitoring.
That is it. So please join me in thanking our panelists and Cassandra for helping to moderate this, and for the Waterfront Alliance staff for helping to put this together. Have a great day, everyone.